Oh,
Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, The Hand of Adonai series, and who is Harrison Sawyer?
And I'm Alton Gansky, author of a whole bunch of novels and nonfiction books.
I'm Molly Jo Riley. I'm producer of the First in Fiction podcast, curator and author of the Unemployment Cookbook and the upcoming mystery location novel, NOLA.
And I am still trying to get back in the swing of things from missing last broadcast. I apologize for that. I was up in Yosemite with the family. So good time. Everything was good, but I did miss you guys, and now I can't remember how anything goes on this podcast. I'm like a complete rookie. So my apologies in advance if I mess things up. I'm sure.
What do you mean if?
Straight. She always does. If you are listening to our audio-only broadcast, just a quick reminder, you can find us at aarongansky.com or on youtube.com, and you can watch the broadcast there, the video podcast, if you will. You can also watch us live every other Tuesday night at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can do that at aarongansky.com/firstsinfictionlive. Let's see what else. If you are joining us in the chat room, there are links that you can click on that will share our website so that other people can join us and chat with us as we talk writing. Everything, right? Oh, subscribe to us on YouTube, blah, blah, blah. Did I miss anything important?
No, thumbs up, share, like, invite your friends.
Do that. We like your friends.
It's a big old party here. We know it's a party in the chat room. Don't keep it to yourself. The more, the merrier.
Don't be selfish with your friends. Your friends are our friends. Our friends are your friends. We share friends. It's fine. It's okay. It's what we do.
Except for Aaron, but, you know, he runs the show, so we placate him when we can.
Nobody likes me. I don't have friends. I just have a bunch of people who get mad when they hear me say that. All right. Moving on. Ask the author question from James Earls, and he contacted me via aarongansky.com. He says, is there such a thing as spending too much time reading and studying craft and also people's work, which seems to lend itself to less writing time? Maybe. All right, Pops, what do you think? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. My answer is a little more verbose. Really, it's super hard to say. It's really dependent. What I define as too much is probably not what you define as too much. We probably just have different levels. It's a qualification, really. It's just something you kind of have to figure out for yourself. Really, you need to be self-evaluative here. You need to reflect honestly at how much time you're spending writing versus how much time you're reading about the craft versus how much time you're reading books that might improve your craft. And if you're somewhere around 90-10, where you're spending 90% of your time reading and studying and only 10% writing, you know, maybe you need to find a better balance. I don't know if you can do 50-50, but I think that's a good place to start. Maybe you read and study for an hour and you write for an hour. Maybe you're at a point when your manuscript that you hit some writer's block, things are going a little more slowly. So you go down to kind of a 90-10 type model, and you're reading and studying 90% of the time and writing 10% just until you can get through that writer's block. It's really going to be pretty subjective. The important thing here is to be honest, an honest evaluation and self-evaluation to say, how much time am I actually spending? How much time am I actually spending with that? If not, make a change to whatever it needs to be. The key is you can't cut one out completely. You need to have both. There needs to be a balance between them, but that balance is going to look different for me than it's going to look for Pops, and it's going to look for Molly Jo. New writers might spend more time reading and studying because they're just developing the talents that it takes. People who've been writing for a number of years are probably, you know, maybe spending more time writing. They might have contracts and deadlines that they have to fulfill. And so they're going to have to do more writing than they are reading and studying. So there's a lot of different variables at work here. Really what it boils down to is taking an honest look at how you're spending your time in that value judgment of if your time is being well spent. As long as your reading and studying is benefiting your writing, I think you're fine. If it's hindering your writing, meaning it's taking away too much time from your project, you're probably going to have to make a switch. Pops, what do you think?
Well, I think you can overstudy, but not to put too fine a point on it. Sometimes the reason some people spend so much time studying and evaluating other people's writings, reading the crafts book and the like, but not doing much writing is fear. They're afraid that once they commit to it, that they may end up wasting their time. They may never get published. They might get some rejection. Somebody may not like it. Well, that's just the writer's life. And it's something that all writers face. So you can do that. It's good to study. I think you should do that. I'm always a little annoyed when somebody gives me something that's quite clear they haven't read a single book of craft. They haven't given any kind of effort to it. They just think it's going to pour out, and then they want me to call them brilliant for it. That's never happened. I've had people give me their stuff, and I could tell they've done the background work and stuff, and they were ready to go. Sure, they needed some guidance. We all do. That's fine. So that's a good thing. The thing is, at some point, you have to you're going to have to sit down at your computer and start producing words. It's somebody who wants to have a lot of muscles. They want to get into bodybuilding, but you're not going to build big muscles just reading bodybuilding magazines. At some point, you're going to have to lift some weights.
What? Wait, what?
And it's going to be the same thing with writing. You can read all the craft books you want, but until you're putting words on the page, some of that won't even make sense to you. You can, read all the Writer's Digest books and other such things, all good stuff. But at some point, you're going to have to start putting one word after another, one sentence after another, and see if it holds, and learn from the places you fall down and appreciate the things that you've done well, and sooner or later, it all comes together. So this is, again, one of those things that goes back to that first Al's axiom: no one ever hit a home run from the dugout. You can study all that you want about swinging a bat, but until you get up there and swing a bat, you really don't know anything. Same thing with writing. So there comes a time when you got to put it down and get to work on the work in progress.
Very well said, Al, and kind of intimidating, and I don't want to follow that now, but thanks. I'm going to say, in my opinion, yes. That's only from my experience as a new writer, and to be honest, it's not that it takes that much time away from my writing, but rather I have found that it's a convenient excuse to not write. I am a nervous, insecure writer. Imagine that. Big surprise. I think we all are, but as a new person especially, or as a new writer especially, I'm not a new person, I'm a new writer. When I have those moments, it used to be easier to crawl inside another book and disappear under the guise of research. But more recently, I find that while I'm studying and researching, it is actually amplifying my desire to be a great writer, which propels me back to writing. With any related project, I try to keep equal parts schedule. That is, for every hour I spend reading a craft book or something in my genre, I spend at least an hour writing my own manuscript. Devote as much time to honing your skills as you do to learning, and you'll grow stronger in your writing.
And I think it's important to remember that you can never learn too much. That continued practice of reading and studying is going to be very important. Stephen King obviously talks about it in On Writing. We've talked about it before here. So I applaud, James, your efforts there to continue to study and grow as a writer. And Molly, I like the point that you make. Sometimes reading those books gets you excited again about writing, especially if you're at a kind of a slow place in your manuscript, and you'll read something that'll kind of spark your interest and go, oh, now I know how to put the pieces together in my current work in progress or my manuscript, and I know how to fix this or that. That's another important reason to read and to study, is to kind of keep that fire going. So all good things.
Two things that I want to add that aren't in the show notes is, the first is I will reread craft books. The same as any other great book or a great movie that we love to watch. It's not just one and done. We want to revisit our favorites. And if a craft book has helped you to start writing, then a year or two later, pick it up again, read through it, and glean more information from it. So that's been helping me currently. Adam, oh my gosh, sorry, Aaron, you'd be super thrilled. Yeah. I know way too many of you double syllable people who start their names with A's. It's just confusing to me. Aaron, I think we're just going to call you Spartacus for the rest of the night.
That's fine.
So
That's fine.
you'll be happy to know that I am currently rereading Mystery and Manners by Flannery O'Connor and Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. So wanted to shout that out. Dave Fessenden says to tell you, Aaron, that he can tell from your physique that you read a lot.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I read a lot about bodybuilding and weight loss.
You know, a long time ago, I read a little biography or something. I can't remember. Maybe it was a biography or something of Truman Capote, who used to, after school, go home and write about 2,000 words a day. That was his discipline. And he did this for a number of years. And then he hit it big with, I think it was In Cold Blood. Yeah, I know that's one he's most remembered for. I can't remember if that's the one where he first hit it big, but anyway. And he said, you know, I was billed as an overnight success, and all it really took was 10 years of writing 2,000 words a day. And so his way of learning was to read and to write and write and write and write and write until he started getting the feel for it and seeing what made sense. So really his best teachers were not just the ones he read, but the sitting down alone and cranking out the words.
There's the old adage, the 10,000 hour rule, that in order to become an expert at anything, you've got to put in 10,000 hours worth of practice. In a day, I tried it. I got close, but was not able to put in all 10,000 hours in one day. Just ran out of time. Just right at the very end, I just ran out of time.
I hate when that happens.
That's a thesis of a week. Thesis of Malcolm Gladwell's, one of his books, and he hits that pretty heavy. That research that led to that.
So there you go, just 10,000 hours of practice. And so I would assume that does not necessarily include the reading and the studying. I would assume that the 10,000 hours of actual sitting down and writing, the actual practice. And it's true for any art form. It's true for music. It's true for painting. It's true for any of the other art forms, sculpting, I'm sure. Writing a sonnet, your first sonnet is not going to be very good. Practice and continue that studying. Now, let's go ahead and move on to our main topic for tonight, 10 reasons novels fail. But before we do, I promised you last month that we would look at Dennis Johnson's 3 rules for writing in honor of to honor him after his passing. I guess it was a month now. It seems like a long time, but I was not here last week, so I wasn't able to share those with you. So I have them here. Just going to read them as they are, and then maybe make a quick comment or two, and then Pops, if you want to weigh in, or Molly, if you want to weigh in, you can. But the first of Dennis Johnson's 3 rules, and he was a secular writer. He was not a Christian writer, but very well respected among the literary community. His first rule was write naked. He doesn't mean that literally, so please keep your clothes on. But what he means is you need to write things that you would never say out loud, to write with a kind of a layer of vulnerability, I would say, and that kind of honesty and brutality almost in your writing. He says, write in blood, as if ink is so precious you can't waste it. So you want to pull from yourself, is what he's saying. Write in exile, as if you are never going to get home again and you have to call back. So you've got to think about, remember in great detail all 5 of your senses, the wonderful things that, or maybe even the not so wonderful things about the setting, the places you are, what made home home, so to speak. I find that really what he's emphasizing here is kind of an intense, almost, for lack of a better term, a brutality in the writing, a vulnerability in the writing. And I think that the reason he's advocating that is because that's what's going to be perceived as being honest by the readers. The readers are going to see that vulnerability and respect it and empathize with it, and tend to be drawn a little bit more toward your characters. Again, these are quote unquote rules, which are really more like guidelines. Feel free to agree with them or disagree with them. A lot of these were kind of thrown around while I was at Antioch. Some of those kind of became mantras. Pops, did you have any thoughts on any of those 3 writing rules?
Well, they're memorable, aren't they? I was a little disappointed when you said not take your clothes off, said write naked. I was, reaching for the buttons. But
No.
only disappointed to find out that, you know, it was a euphemism.
Now we have to come up with a calendars, right? Beefcake writers or something like that.
Oh goodness.
I think
That
advice
would-
is good. It's really what it sounds to me like is that he's trying to teach writers that they have to know a little bit about themselves, and so
Yeah.
Those three things there. So
know about yourself, and don't be afraid of pulling that out and putting it on the page. Not necessarily nonfiction, but I think it's Tosca that advocates putting a piece of yourself into every character, and you can't do that if you don't know yourself. So there's a little bit of self-reflection there too. Molly, did you have any on it?
Concerns? Yes. Don't write naked.
Yeah.
For the love of God, do not write naked in front of the camera. Anything else? No, you guys hit the nail on the head with all of it. And I think it's just that you have to put it in another way. You have to expose yourself in order to put yourself on the paper. And that is what's going to make a good book, is when you are on the paper, whether it's your blood, your effort, your sweat. You can't not. If you're unattached from it, if you're detached from it, you may as well just be writing a resource manual, and that's not going to bring anybody to tears except through boredom. Which
are not the tears that you're going for when you're writing.
Right.
Those are not the tears you want your readers to have.
Right.
Is that a really good book? No, it's just so boring. And I have to read the whole thing for work. All right. So those are Dennis Johnson's 3 rules for writing. Now let's shift our attention to our main topic, the top 10 reasons novels fail. Now, of course, this is our list. Pops, really, it's your list. We just tend to agree with it. These are things that you've seen in multiple manuscripts. I've seen them in multiple manuscripts and submissions over the years. And they're commonalities you've seen in your years of experience, and I've noticed them as well. So here for your improvement, I guess, are the top 10 reasons novels fail. Number one reason novels fail is because the writer is too lazy to rewrite. Good writing is rewriting. You've heard us say it before. We'll probably say it a lot moving forward. Good writing is rewriting. I get excited about it. I'm that weird guy that I'm glad I'm done with the first draft, because now I get a real work, and now I get to write something really good. If I like the first draft, I'm really excited about how good the second draft is going to be. But if you find yourself in that position where you write the end and you think that you're done, you are sadly mistaken. You've got to be able to put yourself in the right mindset to improve your writing with a quality second or third draft, sometimes a fourth or fifth or sixth draft. It might mean a complete rewrite, a complete overhaul, and starting from scratch. I know several writers who have done that with several different books. But it's not always that drastic. It's not always that drastic. But the bottom line is this: if you are too lazy to rewrite anything that you've written, you are in the wrong line of work. It's just that simple. I'm going to be a chef, but I don't like cooking. That makes no sense. Writing is rewriting. So number one reason, people are too lazy to rewrite. Molly, you're going to say something on this?
I did. I was busy in the chat room, so I
figured you would.
I didn't know if I missed it or not. I was going to say, regarding being too lazy to rewrite, that does not mean butchering your work or constant reworking if it's not moving forward. There does come a time when you have to let go and realize it's not going to get any better. It's time to let your child walk on his own. So, and by that I mean you want to rework it to its right, but you don't want to rework it to death, and so that it has no semblance of what it is that you are trying to create.
Was it Tolkien took 10 years to write his first novel?
I'm in good company. I'm working on year 5 of NOLA, so.
Well, of course, he didn't have a computer and stuff, and he did it on the typewriter on his resting on his bed. But after teaching all day, yeah, I think you both make great points here, and The reason I had put that on the list is over the years of teaching at conferences, a couple of decades of this, I would encounter, or through writers groups sometimes, I would encounter somebody who would tell me, well, Al, I don't rewrite. I said, what do you mean? He says, I'm thinking of one guy in particular. He said, I just write it, and when I'm done writing it, I'm done. And that's all I'm going to do on it. I'm not going to go back and read it again. So I'm being, I'm kind of a smart aleck to begin with. So I said, well, what have you had published? Well, I haven't had anything published yet. And I had to tell him, I said, you think there might be a connection? Because every great writer rewrites to some degree. I think one of the problems is that new writers think when we talk about rewriting that you're starting on page 1 and really you're just throwing everything out and starting all over again. You're not. You're just going over it and to see if you can tighten stuff, if you need a little more explanation, if you can get a little better dialogue going in there. And as you get partway through, you realize, I really need a subplot here, and you go through it. I didn't resolve this issue. That's what rewriting is, and it's really, I think now, the fun thing. I used to kind of dread it, but I enjoy being able to go back now. The story's been laid out. I don't have to worry about that. I may need to tweak it here and there, but the basics of the story is laid out. I'm in good shape now. I get to go back and put the finishing coat on this thing. I get to go through and put all the little extra things in there, and I have take out all the extra words I don't need and the things that we've talked about so many times. And where I enjoyed that, the tightening process and the like. So you can't be too lazy to rewrite if you really want to write. And really every writer that I know that has any kind of success always spends some times rewriting. Now, how you do that, let me just throw this in. You don't have to wait till you're already to the end to start rewriting. You could rewrite what you wrote the day before. One of the things I used to do is I would always read what I did before, the day before, add a few things, move on. And then maybe on a Saturday or on a Friday or something like that, I'd go back to whatever I had written during that week and go over it again. And so there's no rule that says you got to finish page 350 before you go back and rewrite page 1. You do it whatever way you want, but there's going to be rewriting involved.
Could you say that again so your son can hear you? Because he's of the theory that you just need to write the whole thing and then go back and edit the whole thing. And we have a family feud. I'm not even going to call it a slight disagreement. That is a family feud going on right there.
No, not at all. Let me take this one, Aaron. No, not at all. And there's many writers. I'm thinking of Angie Hunt, for example, when she does her first draft, it's about 75% of the book. And she knows that. But here's where the logic is in doing that. And it is a good way to do it. And what I just told you that I've done from time to time, even when I'm at the end of that, I go back to the very beginning and start all over and read through it. So that's going to happen one way or the other. Some will do a blast copy. They will write the story as fast as they can. Then they go back and start the rewriting process. Nothing wrong with that. But it does make sense to go all the way to the end and go back, because now by the time you're at the end of your story, you're a better writer than you were at the beginning of your story. They need to go back and take those newly acquired skills and apply them to the beginning, smooth things out. So no, I would not say that I disagree with Aaron on that. Most people do several rewrites anyway, so you can do it any way you want, but at some point you're going to have to go from beginning to end.
Fine.
If I may speak in my defense here, since I'm being maligned on this on my own podcast, I'm being maligned. My point is that if you are rewriting to the point that you are not progressing in your manuscript, that's problematic. And because who will rewrite the first 50 pages ad nauseum and never get past page 50, or they're lucky if they get to page 100 or whatever the case may be. And at some point, it's because they just continually are rewriting because they're never satisfied with their work. I don't mind rewriting as you go, as long as you're still going forward. If you want to look back at the mile that you've just traveled before you drive another mile, that's okay. But if you just, drive a mile and then hit reverse and go back to the beginning and try and redrive that same mile over and over and over again, you're not going to get very far. And so again, Pops, as you say, it works different writers work different ways.
Dean Koontz does the same page. He won't go to page 2 until page 1 is perfect in his mind.
Mm-hmm.
But I can just about bet you money that he goes back at the end and goes over the whole thing again. But as he's writing that, he'll do that, and that works for him. That's a trip to the insane asylum for me, but it works for him, and he's Dean Koontz, so
yeah,
I'm not going to argue with him about anything because he's so good. So, yeah.
He probably also gets a perfect page 1 or a quote unquote perfect page 1 much faster than the rest of us ever could. So I guess when I've got 50 books under my belt, maybe I'll be a little bit better at getting that first page perfect on my first 2 or 3 tries. But for me, my model is just right to the end, go back and then revise. But again, there's nothing wrong with revising as you go, so long as you are still progressing. So number 2 here is the writer is not a reader. Pops, what do you mean when you say the writer is not a reader?
I mean, we're talking about reasons why writers fail, novelists fail at what they're trying to do. These are failures for novels. And one of the biggest problems is the writer wants to be a writer but doesn't really care about reading. And so they don't read. They don't read other novels. They don't read other genres. They just don't do the kind of reading. We talk about Stephen King doing this all the time, where he takes a book with him when he goes to a ball game. He's always reading, and it keeps him sharp. It's one reason I think he's had so much success. He's a good writer, and he stays invested in what other writers are doing. Writers read, period. That's it. If you're going to be a writer, you're going to have to read. Otherwise, you don't know what's going on in the industry. You're not picking up any clues. You're not studying as a baseball player. A hitter might study another hitter to see what they're doing better than what he's doing. You have to read. And so a writer who doesn't read is a person trying to sail the ocean but has no idea how to raise the sails on the boat. Musicians study other musicians. Public speakers study other public speakers. It's just the way the world works. It's the same thing with skilled writers. They continue to read. And not only must writers be readers, they must also ruin their reading. What I mean by that is, and before I became a writer, I used to love to sit down and read, and it was just a whole enjoyable experience. The more I got into my writing, and as I became a writer, I now read every book as though it's there to teach me something. And so I'm constantly pausing on passages and sentences and the way words are put together and the structure of the book and all of that, and I'm analyzing it constantly. So very seldom am I able to pick up a novel and just enjoy it from page 1 to the end. Some say that's a sad thing. Well, it's the cost of being a writer, is that I need to know what others are doing, and some of them are going to teach me. And when I find something that doesn't work, that's just as valuable to me as finding something that does work. You're constantly teaching yourself, and you have to do that as a reader. And there's no sense in repeating someone else's blunder. Let them, if they made a mistake, they fall down in the mud hole. Doesn't mean you have to fall down in the mud hole. You go, hey, you should have gone around, and I'm going to go around. You can learn from their mistakes. You can learn from their victories. So read to learn, read to experience the world of other writers.
Nice. I hear it all the time, but most recently an agent at Blue Ridge told me I need to read for marketing purposes. And sorry, Aaron, but that got my attention more than just reading to be a writer who reads. As writers, we tell the stories in our head, but as a marketer, I need to know what I'm competing against. And I can't know that if I'm not reading and researching.
Yeah, we did a cast some time ago called Reading Like a Writer.
Mm-hmm.
And Heather Luby was on that particular podcast. Go back in the archives at aarongansky.com. You can look it up. It's definitely a podcast worth listening to, Pops. It talks about what you do, how you kind of take a book apart piece by piece, not physically, obviously, but analytically. As you're reading, that to me kind of has a negative connotation. I think it's sharpened my reading, and quite honestly, I enjoy reading more. Now, there are the times where I'll read an occasional book and go, wow, this is just really bad, because I can't stop analyzing it. But then there are times where I will read something and go, and this is really well done, and I really like it. I can still enjoy a poorly written book and say, Well, it's not going to win the Nobel Prize, but that's not what they're trying to do. Give you this example. My wife and I went to see Suicide Squad some months ago when it was still new. And we knew going in, this is not going to be an Academy Award winner. It's a summer blockbuster film. There's going to be a lot of explosions. Hooray, hooray, hooray. And that's what we got. And so if my expectations were a little more aligned with what was delivered. So was it a bad movie? Well, you look at Rotten Tomatoes and it's got really terrible reviews. And neither my wife or I are going to necessarily defend the film and say, well, it's really awesome. But we will say it was a fun movie. They were trying to make a fun movie, and the movie was fun. So the popcorn was good. I mean, expectations are aligned. We're okay. Some books are not written to be Lord of the Flies or Slaughterhouse-Five. Some books are just written to be, the cozy mysteries, those types of things. Romance novels, Amish novels, you can critique those for being the same books over and over again, but there's something familiar about them and their particular need, and as there's a market for them and the market enjoys these types of books. So what you're doing is you're not necessarily trying to analyze why this is not winning the Nobel Prize, but you're saying, what formula are they using? Why is it successful for them? How have they improvised on this particular formula? How have they differentiated this novel from all the other novels in the same genre? And so it's a different set of questions that you ask for that, but it doesn't mean that you don't when you read. I feel like that was a really long response for a pretty short point. So moving on here. Number 3, visions of fame instead of art fill the author's head. Oh man, if you're going into writing for the money or for the fame, it's time to reevaluate your life choices.
Thank you.
I'm just saying, if you're writing to become the next Ernest Hemingway, let's just get a book out there first, and we'll worry about being Hemingway later. It's the same thing about, if you want to be an actor and you've got visions of being a Hollywood starlet or whatever the case may be, and you're a big time action movie star. Maybe you get that, maybe you don't. Chances are you probably don't. But maybe you're just acting in a community theater. Maybe you get the lead part in, some dinner theater presentation of a play that you enjoy. Okay, you're acting, you're doing what you love. You're not making $1 million, and that's fine. If you're doing it just to be famous, there are lots of other ways to get famous. There are easier ways to get famous too. Why choose something that's so difficult to do? To try and become famous. Also, there's no guarantee that you're going to find any sort of fame. For every Stephen King and Dean Koontz, there's 100 other authors, maybe even 1,000 other authors that you've never heard of and probably never will hear of. It's a very saturated market. So if that's what you're going into it for, you may want to reevaluate. Pops, you often say that a lot of people want to have written a book. They just want to see the book on the shelf. They just want their name on the shelf, but they don't want to do the work. And if you think of writing as work, it definitely is work, but if you think of it as something that you have to accomplish to meet a particular goal, enjoy the journey. The focus, for me, the focus of writing is the journey. I enjoy it. I would do it even if I didn't get paid to do it. As a matter of fact, I did it for a number of years without getting paid for it. And it's not like I'm breaking the bank right now, it's not about having a book on the shelf. It's about the journey. So remember that. Enjoy the process. Don't become too enamored with the end product, because then you're going to miss all the fun. That's what I think.
Yeah, well, you're saying some good things there, and really the problem we want to address here is motivation. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to have fame and have fortune, but to be realistic, you might not get either, especially on the fame portion, because there's nothing you can do to gain fame. You can become infamous by doing something horrible or stupid or something like that. But in the writing world, and in many other worlds, fame is what is given to you by others. You cannot demand it. You have to go out and earn it. and you don't know when that's going to happen or what's going to make that happen. Sometimes we think if you just write a really good book, it's going to make you rich and famous. There have been a lot of really good books that have just died on the vine. There have been some awful books, and there always are. They get published and they make millions of bucks. You don't always know. And you don't know what's going to happen. I've mentioned Jerry Jenkins a few times, the Left Behind series, a whole series of books. And he's made tons of money, and he's very famous. But I think he wrote 200 books before he got that. You know, are you willing to write 200 books to get there? It may not take that long. You may hit it right out the gate, as with Tom Clancy, The Hunt for Red October. But the only reason he was being published by Naval Press of all things, which doesn't do fiction, but they decided to do this one. The reason he became famous and had the career that he did is because Ronald Reagan was coming off Air Force One. Someone saw him carrying a book, and they said, "Mr. President, what are you reading?" And he held it up. He says, "Tom Clancy, The Hunt for Red October. I want to know who briefed this guy." That one line made Tom Clancy famous, made his book, and it was a good book. So he had done a good job with it, but that launched a career. Now, you don't know that you're going to get that. You may never get that. Herman Melville, quite famous, Moby Dick, except he wasn't famous in his own lifetime, and he died poor. Okay.
That's so sad.
I aspire to
more than you think.
Yeah, I'm hoping to die poor and then get famous. That's the way I want to do things.
Yeah.
You're on the right track.
I don't have the exact quote, but Herman Melville's book, Moby Dick, was reviewed in the United States. I think they said the book cost 50 cents, but it's not worth 25. They just slammed him. He really had no success while he was alive. I mean, he was selling stuff, but he did not have fame and fortune. Then he died, and then he became famous.
Wow.
Didn't do him much good, but
Ronald Reagan's quip kind of making Tom Clancy famous. Interestingly enough, he also is responsible largely for the success of Jelly Belly. Are you aware of that?
Really?
Oh, Ronald Reagan is, yes.
Yeah. Big Jelly Bean fan, and wrote Jelly Belly just used to send him all these free jelly beans, and he's just got jelly beans all. We went to the Jelly Belly factory on our road trip. I have useless knowledge.
I remember that.
Nice.
Yeah. So from the time he was governor through his entire administration, presidential administration. So, but you have no idea if the president is going to pick up your book. You have no idea if Oprah is going to pick up your book. I'm sure you can send them to them, and they will probably not get read because they're busy people. So, like you say, Pops, it is very much happenstance. So you don't rely on that, and don't put your hopes and dreams on that. Instead, enjoy the process. Number 4, stilted, dull, or unrealistic dialogue. You've heard me say it before. Dialogue is very easy to do poorly. It's very difficult to do well. So I won't burden you with going over all the main points again. I'll just simply say that we've done several podcasts on writing good dialogue. You can look those up and listen to what we have to say. We go into much more depth. But basically, my quick advice is cut all the dialogue that you can. Less is more. Also, remember, characters should not announce something to other characters who already know that information. I always use the example of someone saying, "Hey, Frank, how's your mom who's dying of stage 4 breast cancer?" What? Nobody does that. Dialogue is not the place to present exposition. So you use exposition for exposition. So be very cautious with what goes between the quotation marks, because if it's bad, it can really, really ruin a book. If it's great, it can really, really increase the effectiveness of a book and really kind of ratchet up the quality of that particular book. So make sure that you practice that dialogue.
Yeah, just a couple comments since time's getting away from us. But dialogue comes from an alert ear. Listen to how people talk, and you learn from it, and pretty soon you can write it. But that isn't enough. Dialogue in fiction is written for the eye, not for the ear, because people are absorbing the information off the page. I don't know if you've ever read a book and then listened to the audio version. and sometimes the dialogue is very different then. One of them doesn't read right or sound right. Getting the balance is very difficult, and but if you get it right, it can elevate a mediocre story to great and lofty heights.
I'm currently reading a book where part of it is one of the chapters written as an essay from a 13-year-old's perspective, and the narrator of that particular chapter is a reporter who keeps referencing the parents not as mom and dad or the boy's parents, but rather Mr. So-and-so first and last name. It's so frustrating. It's so not authentic. And there's passages where the boy will say, my father, Mr. So-and-so first and last name. And I just want to, I want to quit reading this book, but I also want to read the rest of it to see how much worse it can get.
Yeah. Yes. I don't think that's why you want people reading your book. This is so bad. I wonder how bad it could get. You know, if you're reading a book and your thought is it can't get much worse.
It can.
And then you read to disprove that, you know, and then it starts to rain. Yeah, good times. Number 5, pacing. It ain't got none. Or it's too slow, or it's too fast. Remember, again, it's about the journey. I notice, I don't want to pick on outline writers here because many of them are very, very good, but I do notice that with outline writers, they're really trying to get from point A to point B as efficiently and as quickly as possible. And they forget that there are times where you really need to slow down, specifically for emotional moments. Or they're taking too long in the action and they're trying to be perhaps too precise and explain every little thing. You know, he folded his pinky into a fist, then his ring finger, and then his middle finger. He's like, he made a fist. Let's go. Let's speed things up. There are speed limits. They're not recommendations. I learned that in North Carolina. Apparently 55 miles an hour in a construction zone means 55 miles an hour or less in a construction zone. You do 68 miles an hour.
There was a 12 by 12 sign.
I passed an unmarked car that was unmarked
And
cop car. He wasn't happy with me.
No. And the plates were from another country. So, you know, there's just all kinds of mess going on with that.
My road trip took so much longer these last couple of weeks because I'm just like, what's the speed limit here? 65, I'm doing 60. So the whole way. In the same way, writing has some unwritten speed limits, if you will. Just be aware of that. There are times where you need to pick things up. There are times where you need to slow things down, really heighten the tension, heighten the drama, heighten the romance if you're writing a romance. Slow down for those moments, and with boring parts, just kind of get through those really quickly. Just be aware of that is what you need to do.
I agree. Lack of pacing is to fiction what a monotone is to singing. Or if you've ever driven on a long straight road in West Texas, you know what I mean. No turns, nothing to see, but the same old thing. Pacing allows you to change things up. So sometimes you want fast-paced action. Sometimes you want to be slow, thoughtful thinking, show that. So vary it. So when you're doing things like action, you want to learn to increase the sense of speed, the urgency, and you can do that by shortening sentences, shortening paragraphs. But something that might be loving or somehow longer, then you can use longer descriptions, more detailed descriptions. Variety is the spice of fiction.
Yeah. You got to be Hemingway in some parts, you got to be Fitzgerald in others. And sometimes you just need to be a little more in between. So it is very, very important, very key here. And think for me, using another musical example, I listen to songs that kind of start off with a particular beat and it's just a 3-chord progression through the entire song and you can't distinguish between the chorus and the verse and the melody's the same. And it's just, you know, 3 to 5 minutes of the same 15-second hook repeated over and over, and it's boring. There's no sense of dynamics. I love bands who understand dynamics, that will bring the music down a little bit. It'll get really quiet, or a couple instruments will drop out, or it's just the guitar, or it's just the bass, or it's just the singer, or it's just the drummer, or whatever the case may be. And then they all come in together at the same time with a big explosion of sound, or they build up, and they build up, and then to that crescendo. I like that. Think of, of operas and orchestras and classical music and the variety that you hear there, and then try and mimic that kind of pacing, that rhythm, the musicality of that with your writing. Make sure that there's a sense of dynamics, that you're slowing down where you need to slow down, that you're speeding up where you need to speed up, things up if things need to blow up. It's always a good thing to, if your story starts to bog down, blow something up. That's what I always say, especially in a romance. Just blow up a character. Spontaneous combustion is real compelling in a romance story. So that's my motto. So
that explains a lot of the feedback that you've given me.
Yeah. How come nobody's on fire? Like, this is chapter 2 and you haven't set anyone on fire. I don't understand.
Right.
Maybe we look for different things in books. All right, moving on. Number 6, unrealistic behavior of characters. We've mentioned this before in shows. I think the real reason this happens is because we don't always know our characters that well. The better you know them, the more realistically they will behave. Let them do what they would do, not what you want them to do. Does that make sense? So instead of thinking, what would I do? What your character would do. And sometimes those are different. Oftentimes, those are different. Yes, we tend to write about characters who are of a similar personality type as us. But again, as you say, Pops, variety is the spice of fiction. Our characters should all be different. And not every character is going to behave like us. Otherwise, it's going to be a very boring story and there will be absolutely no conflict. So really what you want to do is spend some time with your characters, develop them, find out what motivates them. Once you know what motivates them, how they're going to behave. Question to ask, what is my character going to do? Well, what does he or she really want right now? How is he or she going to go about getting that? Are they going to steal something? Are they going to give someone the silent treatment to punish them and show them how awful they are? Are they going to pull someone into their arms lovingly and give them a warm, friendly embrace to encourage them? What is it that my character is going to do? Not what I would do, but what my character would do. You got to spend some time with them to figure that out.
I know we've talked about this before, but if you're not sure what they would say or do in a situation, ask them. Ask your characters. Talk out loud to them like they're real people and give them time to answer you. Walk away, take a breath. They'll let you know what works. And I know I've mentioned it before, but as an example, when I was writing a section of NOLA last summer, I was struggling with my male protagonist and I just knew what I was writing was wrong. And I was so frustrated. I just yelled at the computer. I looked at the page and I screamed at the computer. I'm like, what do you want from me? And I stood up, I walked around the house twice and I sat back down and I had the answer. So sometimes it takes treating the page like a person and it will come back to you so you know what it is, how the characters themselves would act or need to act in a particular situation.
Yeah, stay true to the character. If you have a player in your story who's intelligent, don't make them do dumb things. It causes a disconnect. And I'm thinking of a series of books I read. The books are very successful, but the writer always had very intelligent people doing really stupid things, and like climbing up a drain spout to the second floor open window of the apartment of somebody he knows has already killed 3 people and is due back in the next 60 seconds. But, 60 seconds is, plenty of time to search an apartment and to get back out the window. And it just made no sense. I can't imagine someone with that kind of intelligence and training that he had would do something like that, especially since there was not a compelling reason to do it at that moment. But so, you have to use some logic in that. So no unrealistic behavior of characters. Novels fail because people make their characters do unrealistic things that aren't in keeping. Now, if you have somebody who's used to doing stupid things, that's part of his character, well, then you're okay. Have them do stupid things. But just be true to your character.
Yeah, if they're a risk taker, let them take risks. But if they're, they play it safe, I'm probably going to play it safe. Unless they have a compelling reason, as you said, Pops, unless they have a compelling reason to act outside of character. Flannery O'Connor talks a little bit about that. She says you have to have a gesture that's unexpected, but also completely in character. It suggests world. It suggests not only the moment, but the entire world. And that's kind of tough to do, but finding an action that seems perhaps incongruous with your character, but when all is said and done, you realize that's the only thing that the character could do. That may sound contradictory, but really what you need to do is do the foundational work and make sure that your readers know who your characters are, so that they understand that this unexpected gesture makes perfect sense in context of who my character is. This is exactly what the character would do. It's not what anybody else would do, but it is exactly what he or she would do. I kind of liked Lost in that regard, at least the first season with the flashbacks. It would be telling a story on this timeline where they're stranded on the island, and then another one in the past, and it would alternate between those. And by the time you got to the end of the show, they would make a decision on the island that seemed to make no sense. But when you realize what they'd gone through in the past, okay, now this makes sense that this character would say this particular thing at this particular moment. So be true to your characters. Don't, the number seven reason why novels fail is because they don't involve the reader. I tend to think that there's a lot of people who like to write books to send a message or to be praised. They just simply want people to tell them how great they are. It's really hard to say how great those people are because typically they're not that great. They think they're awesome, but that's not, again, subjective, right? They think they're awesome, but that's because they probably aren't doing a lot of reading and writing. Is to communicate an experience to a reader, not just to tell them a story, not to send them a message, not to have the reader send you fan mail that says, "You're so brilliant." The point of a novel is to communicate an experience to a reader so that they can, stand at the fiery pits of Mordor and contemplate throwing the ring in. They want to experience that. They don't want to be told about it. Really what it boils down to, and this is a hard thing to accept, as a writer, you are of very little importance to the story. Least important thing in terms of story. Your primary job as a writer is to get out of the way of the story. Once you're out of the way of the story, it'll tell itself. And that sounds somewhat contradictory, but when you do enough writing, it starts to make a little more sense. When I first wrote The Bargain, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I think I've mentioned it before. When I first wrote The Bargain, I wrote it because I wanted people to tell me how brilliant I was. And this may shock you, but it didn't get picked up for publication. People said it was too literary, and I thought that meant I was too brilliant for them, and they were too stupid to understand my wonderful work. I've now come to realize that what it meant was it was pretentious and condescending, and nobody likes that. And so sitting there with a thesaurus trying to write my book, ooh, I've never heard this word, I'm going to use it. I had to get out of the way of that novel for it to be successful. And when I went back through and read it and kind of, face palmed and said, wow, that's really arrogant of me. Once I, kicked my ego to the curb, what happened is the story got good. The novel actually became pretty compelling once I got myself out of it, once I got my ego out of the way. So you need to make sure that you're involving the reader. You're letting them experiencing it by getting yourself out of the way.
Yeah, writing without thinking of the reader is really a very selfish thing to do. There's other ways of describing it, but I won't do it on this program. Great writers never lose sight of the fact that someone is going to read their words. That's why we write. So they never forget that. They never forget that we write alone, but we touch the minds and the emotions of thousands of people when your book is in print. So even a poor-selling book is going to touch an awful lot of minds. Let's say your book sells 10,000 copies through its entire lifespan. That's not a lot of copies, but we're told that for every book that's bought, that book is read by about 2.5 people. So really, you've touched 25,000 people, which is a small town, and that's with a book that isn't doing very well. So don't lose sight of your readers. You're going to touch their minds and their emotions. You're leaving your fingerprints all over their brain. So in writing, the reader matters more than the reader matters more than the writer when it comes to writing. A writer without readers is just a stone falling in a deep, empty cave. You've got to keep those readers in mind, and that means your story is preeminent in all things. You want to get that story across in the best possible way to the reader. You do that, you'll have a whole lot more fun writing.
Agreed. Pops, tell us about number 8, the no sense of urgency.
Well, a lot of books fall flat. My old saying is I've read books, and when I teach this, I'd say sometimes books fail because you start off slow and then it goes downhill from there. In any kind of story, it doesn't matter if it's a romance, a Western, sci-fi, fantasy, whatever, there's some sense of urgency. Something needs to be done. The protagonist has to achieve something, stop something. And so I always ask the question, what happens if my hero fails? That's how I test the idea. If my hero fails, the world comes to an end. If my hero fails, a marriage breaks up and children go to an orphanage or whatever it might be. If you're thinking like Old Yeller or something like this, if my protagonist fails, then this young boy loses his beloved dog. There's got to be some kind of sense of urgency that motivate people to do things and to move forward. So that's a sense of urgency that needs to be in every kind of story.
Yeah, I think of it as a ticking clock. You want to know what's on the line, and why must it be accomplished now? If it's not urgent for the characters, there is no tension for the reader. And we talked about it before. Boredom is one of the main reasons that people stop reading books. You have to hook them immediately and keep them hooked all the way through the ending.
Absolutely. Because of time, I'm just going to kind of keep pressing on here. The number 9 reason why novels fail: the writer's afraid to be ruthless. It's kind of like number 1, which is they're too lazy to do the rewriting. But this one's a little bit different because here they're actively rewriting. They're just not being ruthless with their rewriting. Now, it hurts to admit that our work isn't perfect, especially when you're new. Being a writer is this constant battle. It feels very manic at times, where you'll read a passage and you'll be like, that's just some amazing writing. I'm the best writer ever. And then you read the next paragraph and you're like, I'm an idiot. I'm a hack. What am I doing? I want to burn this book. And so there tends to be this alternating kind of, perhaps we're a little too generous with our abilities, our evaluation of our abilities, and at times we're a little too critical. And really what it boils down to here is the best writers are the best rewriters, and that comes from a ruthlessness with your work. It comes from looking at something that says, I need to make it better. That's good, but it's dragging things down a little bit. It has to go. We talk about killing your darlings, and that's kind of what this boils down to. Having the heart to cut out things that you love can be difficult, but it's important to do so for the sake of the novel, for the sake of the story. It's like pruning a rose bush. You got to do it if you want to get those flowers to come out in the spring. I don't know anything about gardening. I really hope that metaphor works. If not, I'm sure somebody will tell me.
You kind of broke up on my end, so I don't know if it broke up going out to others or on the recording. So the point is, novels fail because the writer is afraid to be ruthless with their work, and that is just high-end editing, being willing to cut things out. Writing is an art, it's a craft, it's a skill, and this means we need to be ruthless with our work. We need to make it the best it can possibly be. Can we make it better? Well, sure you can. Can we ratchet up the drama? Can we provide more intrigue? Can we raise the stakes? Can the writing be tighter, the pacing more compelling, the dialogue more believable? There's always a way to improve, and that means you have to be ruthless. So you have to set yourself aside and go at it as though you didn't write it, as though you're just an editor. And when I say just an editor, it doesn't mean editors are just, but I mean that you're no longer the writer, you're an editor going over it with that. Sometimes you have to separate that. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different part of the brain. So you have to be willing to say, okay, this paragraph doesn't work. This chapter doesn't work. Nobody likes doing that. but it's the story that matters. It's the reader that matters.
You know, the answer to that question, can it be tighter? The answer is almost always yes.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to be ruthless. Can it be tighter? Yes. Okay, I've made it tighter. Can it even tighter? Yes. Can it be even tighter than that? Yes. And you'll probably have about 6 or 7 yeses before you get to the, I don't think I can cut any more out of this.
My rule of thumb is tighten till it breaks, and then back off a step.
Till you start to strip the screw. Is that
when the sentence no longer makes sense, then you've tightened too much.
Go back a little bit. Last one here, POV, point of view. We've done casts on this. Do a quick search on aarongansky.com. Bottom line is this: you got to make your point of view work. Don't try and be fancy. Just be precise. A lot of people try and get fancy with the point of view. You don't need to be fancy. You need to be efficient. It's about efficiency when it comes to point of view. If you're in first person, stay in first person. If you're in third, stay in third, and avoid, third person omniscient where you're doing head hopping. That gets kind of bad. But yeah, just make sure the point of view is working. Pops?
Yeah, exactly right. Choose the right POV, though. That's an important thing. And a lot of writers don't think about this. They'll just say, okay, I'm going to do this in third person. Well, why are you going to do it in third person? I'm going to do it in first person. Well, why are you doing it in first person? If you're not certain which way to go, write 2 pages in each one. Okay, write it from a first person point of view. Give yourself 2 pages. Do it in third person. See which sings for you. That will pretty well tell you what you need to do. I love first person. Most of my books are third. But I've got to where I really love first person. And, if that's the rest of my writing career was all third person, first person, I'd be happy, but I still love the third person too. So, but you have to choose the right one for your story.
I'm working on 2 different works right now. One is in third person. One is currently in first, may end up being second. Why not?
No.
No.
He's all no. Just say no.
Back away from the cliff. Back away from the second person cliff.
No, it's going to be second person for at least a day, a good solid day. It'll probably go back to first person after that, but I'm going to try it out. We'll see. Anyhow, I don't recommend that you try second person if you're just trying to break into the market. You can do it in short fiction. It's a lot more acceptable in short fiction. Long fiction novels, in-person novels, and for good reason. There's a lot of people who just really don't like it. A nicer way to say that. A lot of people don't like second person. And again, you have to have a compelling reason. I'm not going to make it second person just because I think it's going to be fancy. There are some compelling reasons why I think second person might actually be a decent choice for this. But we'll find out tomorrow when I write it in second person, and then I'll probably hate it and go back to first. But anyhow, I've spoken too long. Molly Jo, questions, comments, concerns from the chat room?
Yes, first of all, I want to advise everybody that Aaron has a really neat thing called a search bar on his website now. So you can go and type in keywords and it'll pull up all the podcasts related to that particular word or set of words. So search bar, use it. It's awesome. Right off the top at the beginning, Dave wants to know if you met Yogi and Boo Boo at Yosemite. Not Al, Aaron. Did you meet Yogi and Boo Boo at Yosemite?
If I said that I went to Yosemite, I was terribly mistaken. Yeah, I went to Yosemite. They're Yellowstone, aren't they? Yogi and Boo Boo?
I have no idea.
They're Jellystone.
Somebody said something.
Jellystone.
You're right, Jellystone. Yeah. Okay, so Dave.
I saw Bogey and Yu.
Dave also says he suggests writing the Christian nonfiction book Concept to Contract,
which I think is his book.
I think it is.
That might be Dave's book.
I think it is. I think we've referenced that a couple of times before. He also says, as do most of us, if you write naked, please don't do a selfie. So, attaboy, Dave.
Oh, why?
We'd
moved on. We'd moved past it.
Hey, you wanted to know the comments from the chat room. I'm just telling you what's what. Jacqueline says that she was emotionally disturbed by the naked writers, and so she hid. So I said, I'm just emotionally disturbed. Andy Clapp wants to know, what are some of the focal points of each of our rewritings? Is it dialogue, throwaway words, better description, etc.? Andy, for me, yes, it's all of the above. When I'm rewriting, I take what they said and look at it as if I didn't write it, and just as an editor, if somebody else handed it to me, I need to make sure that it's a comprehensive edit and that everything flows.
Yes to all three of those. I'm ruthless with my dialogue. I'm very, very critical of my dialogue. I do a keyword search and we'll go through, and I'm ruthless with, I've got a list of words that I go through called sneaky prose killers. You can use the fancy search bar and find casts that we've done on that if you want to know which words in particular I look for. And which are usually the throwaway words. I'm just throwing my mic on the floor, no big deal. He said, but yes to that one also.
Cool. Al?
I'm sorry, I dozed off while he was talking. After you do a number of books, it takes less time to rewrite because you're always conscious about the stuff you've had to fix before. But I really focus on tightening things, and that's mostly taking weasel words out, sometimes unnecessary sentences. It's really all of it. You just have to judge, is there a flow of information? Is there a rhythm to the writing? Is it emotional? Yeah, the right points? Is it realistic?
Very cool. Andy says he's not sure where he heard it, if it was at Blue Ridge or somewhere else, but somebody suggested hiring someone to help with dialogue. And he was wondering what our thoughts are on that. He can't remember where he heard it. I would say no. I think if you read enough research reference books and you're a good writer, it's going to come to you. If you have difficulty with dialogue up front, you'll get the hang of it. Just keep trying.
I mean, if you want to throw money at me, I'll take your money.
Professional editor over here, just saying. Sorry.
I would not pay somebody separately to work on my dialogue. I would just, if I'm hiring an editor, I would assume that's one thing that they're going to be looking at. That's what I would suggest. So, yeah. Anything else?
Dave says he likes to have a couple characters talk to each other ad infinitum. He doesn't use all the dialogue, but it teaches him more about the characters. And Tess just spent a week at the Santa Barbara Writers Conference and had a lot of different notes in the chat room about what she learned. And one of them was, several instructors said that you must let the reader participate in the creation of the story as they read it. I think that's pretty interesting.
It's true.
Yeah. As long as you're not using that as a license to not include specific concrete detail and imagery. Mm-hmm. Brett Anthony Johnston talks about this. I don't want to take too much time, but I hear that as, oh, well, I really like this book because there's absolutely no description whatsoever, and it really let me think of my grandma when he said grandma. And it doesn't work that way. Brett Anthony Johnston says, the more you describe grandma, even if she is wildly different than the reader's grandma, they are going to construct their own version of grandma that's going to be perhaps some sort of hybrid. They're going to think more about their own grandma if you give them more specific detail about character grandma. Weird. They need some details. And what they'll do is they'll read it and, oh, blue hair. No. Now. But if you don't say they have blue hair, I don't have anything to work with. I can't reject the idea. I can't construct it on my own. Basically, he says you have to give the reader the blueprints, or not a linguistic blueprint, but the raw material from which the library is built. This is a quote from Naming the World, where he says you've got to give enough specific detail, just enough, that the reader can use to construct their own library, their own setting, their own characters. You don't want to overdo it, but you also don't want to underdo it. I'm spending too much time on that. Anything else? Nope,
that was it.
All right, excellent. Well, you know what? Just a little bit over time, but I was gone last week, so I'm making up for it, I guess. A couple of weeks from now, July 11th, which is 4 days before I'm speaking at the Writers of Kern on endings. I'll be out there in Bakersfield. If you're out in Bakersfield, and be there. Stop on by. and you can find out more information probably from me on Facebook. Just say, where's that going to be? I'll let you know. But yeah, we're going to talk about sneaky writers tricks, some of our tips and tricks to writing good novels and good fiction. So make sure you're here for that. Don't forget, you can send us Ask the Author questions. Just got a couple today, one via Facebook, one a couple days ago via aarongansky.com, which is where you can always find me. And if you're looking for Pops, you can find him at altongansky.com. You can find Molly Jo at Frankly My Dear Mojo. And hopefully we'll have Heather join us again soon. You can find her at heatherluby.com. So thank you all for listening. And until next week,